Do vampires go to heaven? Jack's mum had always told him to say his prayers every day. Don't forget to ask, because you have to ask if you want to receive. God's not a mind reader. This was strange because in Sunday school they always said that God knew everything about you, so he already knew what you needed before you asked. I wish he'd pay off my mortgage for me, Jack said out loud while watching news at 10. Muttering to yourself again, said his partner Julie. I think you need a cup of tea. She got up from the sofa and went to the kitchen. It's just the kids, said Jack. They're at that stage of asking awkward questions. What kind of questions? Do you mean they're asking about babies already? Said Julie, sticking her head around the door. Much worse than that, said Jack, speaking to an empty doorway. No, it's all about what happens when you die. Where do you go? Where's Grandad now? All that kind of stuff. Jack flicked between news at 10 and the BBC. Julie, juggling tea bags and milk. Well, you're the one from a religious family. You can answer that one. What did you tell them? It was George, really. So I told him that you go to heaven, said Jack, settling on news at 10. And didn't that just open a right can of worms, because I was bombarded with more questions than Mastermind. Where is heaven? Is it out in the stars? Do aliens go to heaven? Or what about vampires and zombies? There was silence from the kitchen, as if Julie had just been abducted by said aliens, vampires or zombies. What has he been watching? Julie emerged with 2 mugs of tea in hand, wearing an expression that said, you've been letting him watch something he shouldn't. I can't control what he sees around at his friends. They were playing Evil Dead or something like that, said Jack, immediately wishing he had not volunteered so much information. Julie, a little exasperated. Well, what did you say to him? I sort of sidetracked him, said Jack, aware that Julie had her I'm waiting face on, so he carried on. We talked about how to kill zombies, so that the whole heaven thing got lost along the way. Julie, dismissively, I'm not going to have anything to do with it. You can sort it out. I don't believe any of that stuff. What did your mum say about people that don't believe? Where do they go? Jack said nothing. Julie carried on. Well, what are you going to say to him? Jack, irritated now. Why does it have to be me? Julie slapped a tea towel on the sofa. Because it's about time you took some interest in the upbringing of your children. That was it, as far as Jack was concerned. The channel flicking started again. It's not up to me just because my mum was a churchgoer. You can learn all that sort of. They can learn all that sort of stuff at school. Jack felt it was a reasonable response, but Julie started for the kitchen, then turning back, finger pointing. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about everything. You don't lift a finger when it's got anything to do with the kids. And I've had enough. It's about time you started to do more. You come home from work and flop in front of the TV and that's it. Jack got up, sighing, and headed for the kitchen. Julie could see in Jack's face that the shutters were down. That's it, go into silent mode, just ignore everything, hope it all goes away. That night, Jack reached for Julie, but she turned away from him. The next day, George came back from playing at his friend's earlier than normal, well before tea time, which was strange because he was normally out until the last possible minute. George was crying. What's wrong, George? What happened to you? Said Julie. I had a fight with Robbie and I fell over, said George. Julie examined the scuff marks on his hands. A few scratches, but not serious. The little beast, I will have to have a word with his mother, she thought. Julie wiped his hands and face. What was the fight about? Robbie said that vampires can't go to heaven because his dad said they don't exist. And I said, George paused for breath and a sob. My gran said that if anyone asked nicely and really meant it, then God would let them in, and then we had a fight. Julie thought of saying, did Gran really mean vampires or just people? But George seemed to have had enough for one day. You come and have your tea and we'll talk about this with your dad later, said Julie, and gave George a drink of juice to keep him going until his tea was ready. They didn't talk about it later. In fact, Jack and Julie hardly spoke about anything. Jack was still in silent mode, and, if she was honest, Julie was still really annoyed with him. The whole issue didn't come up until the following evening when Julie suddenly remembered about George's fight. George, do you want to talk with me and Dad about what happened yesterday with Robbie? No, it's okay, said George, and then, can Robbie come to tea tomorrow? Julie and Jack, both speechless, looked at each other, eyebrows raised. Have you two made up, said Julie. Yes. Julie needed more than that. What did you say to Robbie? I said that God won't let anyone into heaven if they want to hurt people, and Robbie said he was sorry for pushing me. George carried on eating while adult jaws dropped. George's argument was somehow compelling. That lets us out then, said Jack. Speak for yourself, Julie thought, but for the sake of peace said, I suppose it does. I've been thinking about what you said, Jack said, so reaching for Julie's hand. Let's try and work this out, okay? Okay, said Julie, waiting for more. Jack squirmed. Like a cup of tea? That's a first, thought Julie. He must be serious. George carried on eating his tea.